Hello and welcome to HMS Cast, or historical movie shorts. So in this channel, I'm putting up history videos and just saying a lot of stuff from my point of view about social studies and geography. So I was thinking about what period in history to talk about, and I think the beginning of civilization is definitely a good start. So, the first civilization. Strangely, we don't usually hear or learn about this civilization. Egypt is usually praised as the first civilized people, but these guys are really cool and fascinating. The first people of this civilization are called the Sumerians. Now, the Sumerians are very similar to the Egyptians and other early civilizations like the Indus Valley or even Asian peoples. Now, the Sumerians lived on these rivers that were really fertile, the Tigris and the Euphrates, and they had lots of food. Now, this region is called the Fertile Crescent, and it's amazing, really. It was the hotbed of early civilizations, and basically, they got enough food that some people could do other things instead of just agriculture, like trade or collect other resources. So they started to live on these rivers and build really big and complex villages. And the biggest village was called Ur, UR. So Ur was very special because they built a huge temple, huge for that time, called the Ziggurat of Ur, and they had a huge population as well. Now the temple was around 40 meters tall and 64 meters in length, and in case you're wondering, it was built 300 years after the pyramids, but the pyramids are still bigger, with 146 meters tall. Now, the most amazing thing about this civilization is that it lasted from 4000 BC to 2004 BC. That is 2000 years. That's a long time, and that is pretty amazing. So, the Sumerians were very diverse peoples. They were all over the place in the Fertile Crescent. They weren't one collective civilization, there were many little tribes, and they spoke a lot of languages. The most important of those would be cuneiform, though. Now, one of these little cultures eventually conquered the rest. Now, these people were called the Akkadians, and they built the world's first massive empire by conquering the entire region of Sumer in 2350 BC. This brought an end to what most historians call Ur the First, or, the first civilization of Ur. Now, the Akkadian Empire didn't last very long. A new dynasty dominated the region, and it was called Ur the Second, which is fascinating. Ur the Second. Now, the dynasty was even shorter, and only lasted 42 years. But then you have this guy who was absolutely bananas. He was insane. And he lived around 1,000 years after Ur the First, right? And he wanted to make Ur the Third. Now that's just insane. It's like nowadays trying to make, I don't know, Holy Roman Empire or something. It's absurd. So he built this new Sumerian empire with a lot of war and destruction, and he made some really radical things. But hey, the empire fell to another civilization called the Babylonians, and the Sumerians were pretty much gone. And those old Fertile Crescent civilizations, you might be thinking, well, why don't they exist? Like, why don't we have that essence? Well, that's because after the Arabs, most of these civilizations have died out. And really, I mean, they're very old, and there are still many sites like the Ziggurat, but apart from that, they've mostly been wiped out. So, how was life in Sumer? What did most people do? So, most people in Sumer were just farmers. Like, they just grew crops and had cows and stuff. Cows were very common. Sheep were also pretty common. They grew crops, notably wheat, and sometimes they barley and other things, but mostly wheat. Other people were fishermen or traders with the Arabs in the south. But really the most powerful people were the kings, because the kings of Sumer were thought to be half god, and so they would be also the religious leaders of the tribes. And if anyone disobeyed them, they would be put to death, or they would be tortured, or it was terrible. It was horrible. So even in the first two Urs, like the first Ur, in which it was completely disunited, and then the second Ur with this short dynasty, nothing really happened for the people. Most people they just kept growing their food and trading. Now in Ur the Third, though, with the insane Ur-Namur person, he did some pretty radical changes. For example, now all the agriculture was controlled by the state, and everyone would be assigned to massive food collection projects, right? And then the government would redistribute the food. So it was this weird socialism in like the 2000 BC. And so he also distributed the land into provinces, which was pretty revolutionary. This was later adopted by other civilizations in the region, like the Romans and stuff. So the third Ur brought lots of change for the Sumerian people and for the future. Literature was also very common. Like I said before, there were many languages, and one type of language which was cuneiform, probably the most universal of the Sumerian tongues, was we actually don't know how to speak it. It's very hard to decipher, but it's probably the first language known to man. So I guess I would rate life in Sumer like a 6 or a 7 out of 10. Like you could get killed pretty easily with punishments, or agriculture was pretty violent, actually. And yeah, it was but I guess you lived a pretty good life. But society was stable. It lasted 2,000 years. So in conclusion, I guess you could say that Sumer was the first civilization. Their society was made up of small farming villages and towns that lasted for thousands of years. Really, it's that simple. But I think it still is a very complex and amazing civilization, and stood the test of time for a long, long period. So I think we should analyze, research more about these really ancient predecessors. We actually don't know much about them, especially their language cuneiform is very perplexing, and most historians and people don't understand it. It's also very incredible to see how the first civilization really developed on its own, and how things like state and farming and everything was revolutionized, and really how it came into place. This is really the first building block in humanity. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. It was, a little bit simple because, first civilization. But yeah, there's a link in the description so that you can vote for the next one. And I'm very excited to see you in the next one.